YouTube or whatever.
It is ready.
Okay, and the cameras are ready in the back?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Good morning. I would like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order and welcome everyone. This morning, we'll be discussing the proposed revision to the Board of Education Policy 9160, filling vacancies on the board. Marge will take it from here, but I'd like to also welcome Mr. Matt Ritter of Shipman and Goodwin LLP. As a reminder, what we are doing is we're really talking about Section 4 of the policy. But in order to make a final determination on how we want Section 4 to read, we had asked for some better understanding of how it works. Should there be a vacancy on the board? What are the steps? How are state statute, town charter, and then our local policy applied? And in particular, in the case of someone who may be unaffiliated or a petitioning candidate at the time of their election, and or maybe unaffiliated as a person. I think that has been our primary area of question because it seems to be relatively straightforward in the other instances. That said, it looks like from the scenarios we've seen, this is a complicated area of law. So we're grateful for Mr. Ritter's presence here this morning. Marge, I'll pass it to you.
Well, thank you for your confidence in me, but as you mentioned, it's a complicated legal matter. So I think that all I really should say is that in the packet, you have our original policy and the policy that we last proposed to the policy committee after some questions had developed. And I really think the best way to do this is to defer to the distributor. I'm happy to answer questions that you can't, which I assume will be few.
Okay, so Matt, do you want to give us a little bit of a background, as I said, on, we've certainly read your memo and we've had a preliminary discussion on the application, but just a reminder of how the three entities, statute, charter, and policy apply, and then maybe some just high level summary of the scenarios you provided, very high level, because we've all read them and talked about them a little bit.
Yeah,
and then we'll
I
open it
promise
for questions.
I promise you I won't read a memo that you have. There's no
Yes,
more
thank you.
annoying when people do that, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, state statute trumps everything to the extent it's applicable. Then you have your town trump an ordinance or certainly a Board of Ed policy. And then you have your Board of Ed policies. It's important to remember that we do our best as lawyers, as a judge would, to try to read everything to coexist if possible. And so to the extent that they conflict, we went through the order of what's controlling. But if we can, and there's no conflict directly on point, we'll try to make all three of them have legal relevance where possible. And that's what my memo talked about, trying to apply all three. I think there's a lot of confusion about 9-167A. The legislature has a very strong public policy going back decades of ensuring minority representation on local boards and commissions that run townwide elections. It does not apply if you run district elections. So you might see a city council in Bridgeport or New Haven with 35 Democrats, for example. But for your town, where you run townwide, it's applicable. But it does not always apply. It only applies when it's triggered and you would have a situation in which you would be out of balance with the statute. So I think there's some confusion that sometimes people think 9-167 always applies. It does not. It sort of sets a floor of what they expect, but you can have a charter or policy that may have a different level of representation. For example, at 5-4 versus 6-3. In your case, you had a unique situation. It is very rare for a petitioning candidate to be elected to any office. It's quite an accomplishment, frankly. It's very hard to do. And so as we went through the statute and your charter and your policy, as you can see, it was difficult to necessarily come up with exactly what would happen in a vacancy because not everything was entirely on point. And that's the scenarios we walked through. So the most common scenarios you would see, or the ones we talked about, where a Democrat or Republican resigned, and they were elected as a Democrat or Republican. It's pretty simple, right? The charter would talk about who would be replaced. It would be someone from the same political party. The big nuance here is the difference between the charter language and the Board of Ed policy language. If you read your town charter provision, it's very specific about the time of election, okay? And I think that was done, and I have no idea, to avoid a situation where someone switches political parties, because it's so specific about the time of election. And so I think in that scenario, if you were elected as a Democrat, change your registration to Republican, under the charter, you actually have to be appointed Democrat, which is the original party. And I wonder if that was done to account for a situation that occurred. You never know, but it's very specific. But your Board of Ed policy has very different language. It talks about the political party of the person who filled the position. And that's why you can get different outcomes, as you saw in my memo. So at the end of the day, you guys can do whatever policy you want. I'm glad to talk about it. But if the policy change that you have presented today, the red line that I would set, if a petitioning candidate resigns under your new policy, your policy doesn't speak to who should fill the vacancy. You really don't have a policy anymore that deals with it. We revert back to the town charter. As I said in my memo to you all, my best reading of how to apply that town charter would be to appoint somebody who was, unaffiliated because the person didn't run on a party. But the town attorney may not agree with that, and it really leaves it wide open. My reasoned analysis is you would try to do your very best to appoint someone from the same party, quote unquote, the person was elected and appointed to. But I acknowledge different lawyers could reach different conclusions. And so that would be up to the town, at that point, it'd be up to the town attorney to make that decision.
Okay, yes.
I'm sorry to jump in. I'm getting text messages that people can't follow on the YouTube, that the audio is not working properly. There's a terrible echo and they can't.
There is an echo. I can hear that.
You can hear the echo. Sorry, just before we
No,
go
that's
any
okay.
further.
I hear an echo, but it's not. I can understand it.
Okay.
Jeff's not there, it's IT, so I have to go get them.
Okay,
All right.
thank you, Cass. Thank you, Julie. We'll continue with the meeting, but we will work on the audio as we speak. Okay, Matt, anything else you want to add before I open it to questions?
No. There's
Okay.
still an echo, FYI. I can hear that. Yeah.
Yes, I think it might take us a minute to address the echo.
Okay.
We'll try to do that while we're speaking, just in the interest of everyone's time. Hopefully it's not you hearing yourself over and over again. That's hard to talk through. Okay, and board questions, Julie.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
So kind of back at the beginning, the 9-167, I have a couple questions there. I don't know that it's that rare for a petitioning candidate to be able to get elected in this town because we often have uncontested races. So you have an empty seat, you run, if you were to end up as a petitioning candidate, I don't think it takes a tremendous amount of votes to actually make it into a seat. So maybe I'm misunderstanding something there, and please, by all means, correct me if I am. So I just wanted to mention that. And with that in mind, what I'm curious about is this idea that the line you run on negates your party affiliation at the time that you're running, as you're elected, et cetera. So if I'm a registered Democrat, I run as a petitioning candidate, I'm then considered unaffiliated, I'm elected and I'm considered an unaffiliated is what I've understood from your memo. How does that protect for minority representation? In case someone, it sounds to me like there's a loophole there where you could end up with 9 seated registered Republicans on a Board of Education that's supposed to have minority representation accounted for. So how does that all jive?
A lot to unpack there. First thing is I was referencing maybe on the statewide basis petitioning candidates. Maybe in Darien it's more possible because to your point, you only run 9 people. But across the state, it's just very, very rare. That's all I was trying to get at. It's a very unique situation. I don't come across many petitioning candidates as a lawyer who are victorious. You are correct that there is scenarios where you could have a 9-person board and everybody's enrolled in the same political party. Yes, that's true. But that's not what the statute prohibits. If the three people, right, are elected solely as a party that is different from the party which they're enrolled, okay? And you can argue whether that's a good law or not, but that's what the law says. So it's not uncommon, for example, take the city of Hartford. They have a 9-person city council, and they have probably had 8 enrolled Democrats at one time or another. The minority party, the 3 people who were not elected as Democrats, are enrolled Democrats, but they are solely elected on the Working Families Party line. So you may feel that that doesn't really honor the spirit of minority representation, but the voters did vote for 3 people who were solely elected as a different party line. Okay? I think the other mistake people make is the individual who petitioned is still an enrolled Democrat. I don't, that person's not unaffiliated for matter of voting in primaries, being on a town committee. They're still an enrolled Democrat. The only thing that they're not treated as a Democrat is for purposes of 9-167A. And that's just the law. The law is about if you run solely as a candidate other than what you're enrolled, we go back to that. But this notion that they're not a Democrat or they're unaffiliated for other legal purposes, no, they could vote in primaries and things like that. Absolutely.
Katie?
But yeah, it's an end around the minority statute if you view it that way. But I think others would say the voters chose to elect these people from this political party, and therefore that trumps what they're enrolled as.
Hi, Matt, Katie Lublin. Just for clarity, I happen to be that registered Democrat who was elected as a petitioning candidate.
Yeah.
And I think, and I really appreciate the context that you're giving us about what we typically see in the state and in larger elections. I do think that this board needs to focus our policies on our town and what we think is potential to currently happen. That being said, Darien is a bit of an anomaly in the state of Connecticut in several ways. So I think that I appreciate you outlining the memo, hearing you talk through it. It definitely clarifies some of it from as it was written. I do think, though, that some of the nuances left out. And one of the questions that I have for you is about this concept of being solely elected as another party and what level of nuance really has to be taken into account, which I find could be problematic in interpreting policy, especially, when you have a situation in front of you that's not hypothetical anymore. So, for example, my situation was not that I was elected as a separate party. It's not that I wasn't like wanting to run as a Democrat. It's not that it's not that I was running for a different party. The Democratic DTC just didn't make the filing deadline. So they endorsed me. They, put out, they spent money on the camp, right? There were multiple, not even subtle, like explicit nuances where I was the Democratic candidate. I just wasn't on that line. So to Julie's point, how do we, even if the state statute, as you said, does not necessarily protect from a board being made up of a full membership in one registered party based on ballot line item, how do we uphold the spirit of minority representation so that we eliminate this potential for people to knowingly run as registered in one party, a candidate of that party, but petitioning on?
Yeah, so in your situation, even though the Democratic Party supported you and all those things, for state law purposes, you were not elected as a Democrat, right? And that's what the statute says. How could you protect against your scenario? I don't know that you can. Ultimately, if you have a bunch of people that want to petition on, and they happen to get elected, then you might be left with that scenario. I think what the state statute would say is the voters made that decision. And again, I think it would be an unusual scenario, to say the least, to have that. But I guess I don't know how you can protect against the scenarios that we laid out. Like I said, the city of Hartford has had 8 Democrats before. People were elected solely as another party. So you can look at that as a dangerous outcome. But I think what the statute would say is we limit the party to, what they ran as. So.
I think the other local protection, Matt, is that our town charter only allows us to vote for 2 Board of Education candidates at a time, with the theory being that that would keep you from running 3 members of the same party and all 3 people getting all the same voters.
That could help too.
Any other questions from the board about this?
Yeah, I have one more.
Greg?
Just a quick question. Do you typically see it where the town charter is different in terms of the way it's structured versus the Board of Ed charter?
Sometimes you'll see Board of Ed policies. I wouldn't say different. The language is just interesting how your Board of Ed policy was drafted versus the charter, and they coincide and work. They say the same thing 95% of the time, right? It's just this one scenario. So yeah, it's a little unusual. It'd be nice if they squared up, but to be fair, the town charter has limitations in that it speaks solely about political parties. It does not address a petitioning or unaffiliated candidate winning, right? And your policy does. So maybe your charter needs to be cleaned up, but I know that's difficult to do. Now, I just don't know what happens in your town if, forget petitioning for a second, let's just say an unaffiliated person won. Again, my best reading of your charter is you should appoint an unaffiliated person, but to be fair, they were not elected as a political party. And so there's limitations in that language.
So can you expand on that? That's something that came up in the board meeting, was what if we have, in the case of, how do we talk, you talk about unaffiliated as a party in certain instances and kind of keeping with the spirit of the law. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah.
Because there are times when unaffiliated doesn't get treated like a party.
Yeah, so in your charter, it says if someone vacates the seat, there's a vacancy, they should appoint somebody of the same political party that that person was appointed or elected as. But of course, an unaffiliated person is not part of a political party. So again, my best analysis would be that the council, and it's up to the town attorney, not me, maybe should just appoint an unaffiliated person because that's the closest. It's the same language in 9-167A, right? It says the same thing. Provided any person whose candidacy for election to an office is solely as the candidate of a party, other than the party in which he is enrolled. Well, that again talks about party, and a petitioning candidate is not elected as a member of another party. So maybe we use the term party globally to incorporate unaffiliated, but a town attorney could take a different position, I think, and say, well, there's no political party, and so unless 9-167A is going to be violated, you can do whatever you want. I don't think that's the right approach, but one could make that argument.
How are you seeing boards around us handle this question of unaffiliated? Are most of them leaving it fairly unspecified in their policies, and just are most people ending up dealing with this entity as you described, sort of as a loose definition of party?
So few people are elected and not a part of a political party. It's just, I know in Darien it might be different, but I would guess if you looked across the state, 97% of people elected are part of a political party. That might not be Democrat or Republican, by the way. It could be independent, green, working families, but it's just pretty rare to see that. I don't know that many Board of Ed policies get to this level. It's mostly controlled either by the statute or a town charter. So I guess I couldn't really answer. I don't think it's that common to address that situation. Because it's so rare.
Robin and then Julie, and then did I
Um,
see your hands there?
I have a question just on the current redlined version, which removed all reference to filling a vacancy with the same political party. And I just wanted to ask the question is it the model policy from Shipman and Goodwin that does not say that you need to fill, that on the Board of Ed policy, that you would need to fill it with the same political party? Is that why that language was removed in the redline version of what we're talking about?
No, this is not a model policy. No.
March,
Well, no, it's not the model policy in its entirety, but the language in the first paragraph, which was, I think, requested the board to go back to Shipman's. Model.
Margie's mic needs to go on. Sorry about that.
Sorry, John. So yes, this is not the model policy, but paragraph 1 tracks Shipman and Goodwin's model policy language, which just references unless otherwise provided by charter or special act. So the rest of it, Matt, you're right, are things that we've gone through at the board level and tweaked some changes, but that first paragraph is Shipman's.
So can I just follow up then? Why was the redline version, why did it choose to take out that specific language about replacing it with the same political party? Because I think I missed that when I listened to the policy meeting discussion.
I believe it's because we've been saying all along that unaffiliated is not a party.
Yeah, that's,
So this is where I'm having trouble. We go
Okay.
back and forth on whether unaffiliated is treated as a party or not. But most of the discussion around section 4 has been that question of how do we craft the policy so that it could cover a situation where we have an unaffiliated board member who now needs to be replaced.
Okay.
so going back to Shipman's model policy that we saw and then pushed to the side, I'm wondering if we go back to that because it is pretty vague now that we have an understanding of from Mr. Ritter of what he's saying, where it says, you know, if there's not affiliated with the political party, then you just fill it with someone as long as it doesn't, what does it say? As long as it complies with the minority representation set in 9167A. Does that satisfy the requirements, or is that still, do we still need to create issues for these nuances and other?
So I think there's two questions there that I hear, I think Sarah asking. One would be sort of what is the Shipman and Goodwin policy? And based on our new understanding, is that what we prefer to adopt? But Matt, I would ask you just philosophically, what are you recommending boards of education about the level of specificity that they include in their local policy?
Yeah, again,
Because of the nuance.
I don't believe we have a model policy on filling vacancies that gets to this level of detail. If there is, I haven't seen it. And I would recommend against a model policy because I think every town's going to be a little unique. There are the two things to keep in mind here. We're talking about unaffiliated candidates, and they're different than petition candidates. And I need to stress that. And let's look at your current policy without the red line, okay? If an unaffiliated means you are not enrolled in a party, petition their way around. Under your old policy, it says, because the town charter doesn't deal with that, because it says political party. It says the board shall fill such vacancy with an individual from the same political party as the member who previously filled such position. And again, unaffiliated is not in a political party. So my best reading would be to appoint an affiliated person. But you could certainly clarify that to say, or if the person was elected as an unaffiliated, you appoint an unaffiliated person. That would be okay. But you have a petitioning candidate who is an enrolled Democrat who won. And it's a different outcome under your old policy because that person is a member of a political party. They're a Democrat, and so it would be a Democrat. And you guys pick what you want. It doesn't, we don't care, we're agnostic. But be careful to think it's the same as a petitioning is the same as an affiliate under your current policy.
John has his hand up.
John,
So thank you, Matt. It's been helpful. One, I think we all know it's important that the political parties get their ducks in a row before election deadlines so that people can run on lines.
It's very hard to understand you.
Two, and the issue that you just brought up. I think we're covered by.
John, can you repeat what you said? You're breaking up a little bit. We can't hear what you're saying.
So let me try. I think we're covered by state statute here by protecting minority representation and giving the board flexibility in the case that we have today, where we have a petitioning candidate controlled by the Democrat Party. That the board has the flexibility to appoint a Democrat if the petitioning candidate resign. And again, I'm not hinting at anything. I'm just using an example. And so I think we're kind of reading way too into like trying to match unaffiliated members of the political party. I think what state statute does is just protects against minority representation. And so does our town charter. So I think as we're protected across the board, unless the board really wants to, match up a U, if a U runs with another U. But I think in general, minority representation statute is just protecting so you don't get 9 as elected board members of one party or another.
Okay, we got most of that, but your last line, you faded out.
I guess what I would say is I think again, what we're seeking to do is provide a policy or create a policy that continues to protect against minority representation. So the example of 9 members of the party are on the Board of Education.
Good point. Okay. Anyone else? Katie?
Thank you. I think that it seems to me that the origination of looking into this policy was to try to avoid having to fill someone who is elected as an unaffiliated, someone who is not affiliated with a political party, of having to replace them with an unelected. Is that correct, Julie? That like the origination of this policy change was to try to avoid a vacancy by a U having to be replaced with a U?
Well, it wasn't that specific. It was about what would we do if there were a U. We
Okay.
didn't go in knowing what we wanted it to be.
Okay.
If that clarifies.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Because I think like what we have to ask ourselves is like, what are we trying to solve for, right? Like what is it that we want this policy to do and represent? And then we also have to ask ourselves, what might the unintended consequences of a new policy be? Like, these are just basic questions that we have to ask ourselves about policy. And I do think that, that we've learned quite a bit through this exercise. We didn't know that there was loophole might not be the accurate language for this, but essentially that there was possibility where we could have a board filled with 9 people registered of the same party. And that, maybe has to go up the chain. But I think the spirit of honoring the electorate, the spirit of, in keeping with representation of our town is important. So what we decide, I think, needs to come back to those general questions of what are we trying to solve for and what unintended consequences might there be?
So, Matt, I think you may need to walk us through a petitioning candidate who at some point registers as an R and then resigns, because I think that triggers the minority representation statute in this town at the point of election. So,
so you mean that you had, so if you have a board, it's a good point, where it's 6-3, and one of the 3 minority party, right, that's the term in the statute, is enrolled Republican in that example. You now have 7 enrolled Republicans, but only 6 were elected as a Republican. Let's say the 7th enrolled Republican was elected as an independent or petition, whatever it is. They would be allowed to serve. Again, this happens, this does happen. But when they resign, okay, you have 6 Republicans, I'm assuming 2 Democrats, and you have this 1 vacancy. You can't appoint a 7th Republican at that point in time, right? Even though the person was an enrolled Republican. So that's where your town charter would be trumped by the statute. That would be the answer to that. And then the question is, what are you filling them with? You know, is it the same political party, which I guess that you're right. Your chart does say same political party. So in that case, if it were on the independent party, you have to go find someone from the independent party. If they were petitioning, then you're kind of back to whether that would be, is it unaffiliated? Is it a Democrat? That's probably an open question. You also have people who make their own parties. There's a city councilman in Hartford. He's the only member of his party. So if in that scenario, nobody will appoint from this party. So that's why you can't craft a perfect policy. But in that, but you do have to be mindful that if you end up with 7 enrolled from one party, and one of them is in the minority party because they ran under a line, at the time of vacancy, you couldn't put a 7th Republican or Democrat. Correct.
And then what about when it comes time to certify an election?
What do you mean?
So let's say we had, so we run 3 at a time. Let's say that we had tripped over the, somebody switched from a minority party to a majority party. And so we had, if you were to certify, what happens then?
You mean there's no vacancy?
Right, you just run a regular election.
You couldn't run that many Republicans.
Well, you could run them, but the
No,
question.
no, careful here, because the person who's elected, enrolled Republican, if they're elected as a Green Party, then they're going to say Green Party.
Okay,
It's different though when you resign.
got it. Thank you.
Yes.
Julie?
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that we are very unlikely to be able to craft a policy that will cover every possible scenario that could present itself sometime in the future. So we should probably give up on trying that and make sure that our policy is going to address the most likely scenarios and give
Yes.
the best direction that it can to us with the right flexibility. So I will throw my hat in the ring that I think what we probably should be looking at is something that stays a lot closer to Section 4 of our existing policy. And I say that recognizing that we've been working on this for over 10 months. So I just need to say that out loud. And I think we have to decide whether or not we're going to decide that party means unaffiliated, or if we're going to put in some sort of, or lack thereof, party language. And I personally prefer to have our policy continue with the provision that it's the party with which the member is enrolled at time of vacating the seat versus what the charter says, which is their party affiliation at election time.
And the Secretary of State, by the way.
What about the Secretary of State?
State statute also considers the candidate that is elected in that as what their party is at time of election. Okay.
Is that something for the policy? I'm
No,
not
I'm just
understanding.
saying, how the state and the charter see it are very similar.
Yeah, so if you're, yes, one thing your Board of Ed does, I wrote this back in a few months ago. For an unaffiliated, please don't confuse them with petitioners because they're different. They may be the same, they're different in different cases. You could just say if a person is elected as an unaffiliated, is unaffiliated, not affiliated with any political party, and they vacate. The successor, to fill the vacancy shall also be someone who is unaffiliated. And that's pretty clean. And that's probably what your charter says anyway. It just doesn't say it perfectly. And that's probably pretty easy. I think where you've been tripped up in the past is the petitioning candidate enrolled in a party, but elected solely as a petitioning candidate. And that's where I think things have kind of been more confusing. But under your current policy, I would argue that you should, if the petitioning candidate enrolled as a Democrat or not, you'd be appointed for the Democrat. Because that person is a member of that party.
Greg?
So I'm thinking through, there's a bit of it seems like there's a gap in that, just in terms of like in Katie's situation where she was supported by the Democratic Party, but she wasn't a Democrat at the time. So if you automatically replace with Democrat, like, think about that in reverse. Then doesn't that,
Sorry, Greg, I was a Democrat. I just wasn't on the ballot line.
I know, that's what I mean. So like, couldn't the Republicans, like, you can effectively, like, Republicans could theoretically take control of all 9 seats pretty easily doing it that way, because we could just have a bunch of people run as
Yeah.
they're registered Republicans, but
For,
you know, for purposes of the voting, they're not on the Republican line, and you could just creep and creep and creep, and then if they resign, they're automatically replaced by Republicans.
but they're not, because
No,
then
they're not.
then you have minority
Then-
representation.
that's it. So as
Correct.
long as you keep voting them in, though, they would be, that's where I see the gap in this.
Okay, wait, Matt was going to speak. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I don't think it's a gap. It's what state law says. And I think that the state statute is its very best here. But again, I can only go back to city councils in the cities where the voter registration is pretty outsized, admittedly, too, right? And it happens, you get 8 Democrats, but they were elected as the Working Families Party. And state law says, what do you want us to do about it? It is what it is. We don't look at enrollment only, we look at the parties that are elected. So if you're trying to avoid 3 Republicans running on the independent party, 3 Democrats in the Working Family, you need to address that in the state statute. You're not going to change any charter or policy. Is it an end around? I don't know. It's pretty rare. Most times we run on a major party, 95% of the time the major parties win, and they get 6-3. But yeah, there are, if you want to call it a loophole, you could, or you could argue that the voters were drawn to this Green Party and they wanted to vote for it. You could argue both ways.
John?
I just want to, challenge the premise that I heard earlier from Julie that we often have candidates, either independents or petitioning, win elections. Yes, that might be the case in a non-contested election, but we often have a board of selectmen petition candidate. I think, for the last several election cycles, it has not run. So, I know, I get it that it happens in certain cities, in towns where party members run under different party names, but I think we have protections, again, minority representation, should there be any sort resignation. And as Jill pointed out, the cadence of our elections, once a year for 2 board positions, would also protect the electorate, if you will, if people view candidates misrepresenting their parties as they were.
Julie?
Thanks. I just want to correct. I don't believe I said that. What I said was we frequently have uncontested races. And in an uncontested race, it's not that difficult for a petitioning candidate to petition onto the ballot, and it would make it easier to be elected. If that's not what I said, that was certainly what I intended.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Katie?
Thank you. I would just say again that, Matt, while I appreciate your context and the larger scope, I do think that our policy has to be reflective of our situation. And Darien's voter makeup is 35% Republican, 25% Democrat, and 40% unaffiliated. So the majority of people living in Darien registered to vote are not affiliated with one of the 2 major parties. And I certainly don't recall in recent years someone running under another party's line to get elected. But I do think, to Greg's point about the way that what the statute allows, that there absolutely could be candidates who petition on, but are significantly supported by a political party. I think that the real issue that we have to be concerned about is that minority representation and people kind of abusing the state statute to fill boards. Now, that might be outside the scope of this policy.
Yes.
the vacancies are less of an issue. But I think that we need to, again, think critically about how we might be furthering unintended consequences.
So now that we're at 45 minutes, I would suggest that we have two models of language in front of us. If there is another model of language that anyone would like to see in preparation for the next board meeting where we will actually take a vote, now would be the time to ask.
And just one thing I'll do is there seems to be this concern about petitioning candidates in Darien, which I have to say is a novel thing. I acknowledge that. Let me check with Secretary of State on that scenario. Maybe they would say that you can't have, you know, all Republicans or all Democrats elected in that context as petitioning, since it's not a political party. I'll double check that, okay? Because you're right. 95% of the time, the people who are elected are enrolled in a party but run under another party. I just can't stress enough how rare it is for a petitioning candidate to win across the state. And also, I want to point out, unaffiliated voters are the majority of almost every town in the state of Connecticut, if not every town. So that's actually not that common. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Back to your question, Jill, I would like to see us in section 4 put in something about an unaffiliated or someone not affiliated with a political party. I would like us to be specific about that, and whether that's just simply if someone is unaffiliated, then we just make sure that we comply with 9167A. I just want to be sure that we're covering ourselves and not going all over these questions, you know, when someone resigns and we have to walk through it. Like if it's spelled out, fine, yeah.
So, Matt, I don't know whether you remember this, but in February of 2024, I think Jessica consulted with you and you sent us some of that language. So.
I did.
So
And that's what I'm
we-
looking at.
Yeah, you could say the Board of Education shall fill such vacancy of an individual. I would say that is enrolled, you know, from the same enrolled, and from the same political party as the member who previously filled such position. And in the case of an individual who was elected as an unaffiliated, such position shall be filled with someone who is also unaffiliated. That language does two things. It takes the petitioning candidate who was enrolled, in this case, the Democrat, and assures the appointment is a Democrat, and it covers the unaffiliated scenario. The only time this will not work, would be if you had a Republican under your current structure. Take the same language. Republican petitioned up or ran as a Green Party, okay? The Board of Education shall fill such vacancy of an individual from the same political party. Well, you can't. You have 7 Republicans. And that's where 9167A would kick in. But the language I gave you under 4 would address your current scenario, for sure.
So let's say we did have a Republican run under the Green Party. I would assume that going through the Cascade Town Charter would apply first and would trump our board policy.
Correct. And so you'd have to find a Green Party.
You'd find Green Party. And so
Yes.
in some ways, our local policy wouldn't even apply. It wouldn't
That's a
kick
good
in.
point. Yeah, it would be a Green Party. Good point. Yep.
Okay.
It's if it was the petitioning where it gets more
Okay,
complicated. And I'm going to check on the petitioning because I admit it's so rare. Maybe SOTS has a different opinion about petitioning versus enrolled.
okay.
I'll take a look at it.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks. Matt, can you just clarify the language that you just suggested? Did that
Yeah.
stick to as they were elected or as they were enrolled?
Enrolled.
Enrolled.
Okay, thank you.
Because that's how I read your policy now.
Yes, I agree,
It
me too.
says from the same, just you want to use the statutory term as enrolled.
Thank you.
Do you find that boards of education need to be reminded that there is that cascade, meaning that, you know, sometimes we read our policies very literally, and let's say 5 years from now, we're all not on this board anymore, not that I wish that, but let's pretend we're not. And the board picks it up and says, okay, well, we're going to start from here. And I've got someone who is enrolled, you know,
Yeah.
Republican, regardless of the fact that they ran Green Party. You know, how do we in the policy protect for that long-term transfer of knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You can certainly cite to 9-167A. You could say, you know, nothing in this policy shall conflict with 9-167A, the general statutes of the town charter.
Mhm.
Yeah, you could say that. Sort of
John,
highlights the people.
okay.
I'm sorry to belabor this, but this is part of the problem. If you're like, let's just say an R is elected, and that's the will of the electorate, and somehow the R turns to a D and then drops out. Wouldn't the board want to stick with the will of the electorate versus the fact that the person changed? I mean, so this is where we're starting the unintended consequences that Katie just mentioned. You know, you have to think about those things too. So
Yeah.
I think we're,
Well,
you know,
that's-
again, there are so many commutations to how this could play out. And I just want to make sure we're considerate of the electorate, the time of election, because that's what the ballot represents. No matter what people say they are or what they are, it's listed on a party line or an affiliated line.
Matt,
And
can
then
you,
two,
can
that
you,
we maintain minority representation, and three, also are as consistent as possible with the town charter.
Matt, can you speak to that? The
I'm
relative.
not sure I heard it that well. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what the point was. Can someone repeat it? John's got the tough background for me. Yeah.
I think the underlying question was the will of the electorate and how we best honor that, meaning that, you know, we might have a situation where if in our policy, we say, you know, we're looking at where someone's enrolled. Now, again, I think this only applies in the case of a petitioning candidate, because I think in any other case, town charter would activate first.
Correct. Mhm.
Okay.
97, 99, 91, whatever, your charter is going to control. Yeah. It's going to be the party they were elected as.
Okay, so maybe we should have a reference definitely in the town charter if possible, and state statute right there in the policy.
Yeah, so yes, and in one, it does say unless otherwise provided by charter or special act, but I think, yeah,
Correct. Yeah, we can make that more clear. Sure.
I think we should make that more clear.
Are you
Yeah.
saying enrolled at the time of the election or enrolled?
At the,
When
at
the
the
time
at the time of the
At the
vacancy?
time, at the time of the
Yeah.
vacancy?
Yes, so this would be the case of a petitioning candidate.
Why wouldn't, yeah, I kind of agree with John there, like, why wouldn't it be at the time of the election? Because that, who people vote for is what matters.
Which is what the state, what the town charter says. It's
Well,
at the time of election. Go ahead,
I
Matt.
see this point. Yeah, I see this point. Yes, you could say that. You should fill the vacancy with an individual from the same party that the member who was elected, when they were elected, they were enrolled in, because you could change your political parties.
Right.
No one's talking about that. So that's a good point. You could
That
make
was the
more
example
clear.
that was the example that John gave that you couldn't hear.
Yeah, so that's a fair point. If you guys want to do that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
It doesn't change her situation.
It does not change the situation, correct? But if you, by the way, if you don't think that people change political parties all the time, you should see the memos we've written for Bridgeport. I was telling the chair, we once had a scenario where 3 people changed their party affiliation within 90 days, and then they had 3 vacancies. And I almost quit the practice of law writing that memorandum. Okay, it gets complicated. It does. And that's why it's hard to just draft a policy, or it's hard. It's really hard because there's a lot of nuances to it.
Okay, Julie?
Thanks. Just quick, out of curiosity, I'm a registered Democrat, elected as a Democrat. If I were to switch my party affiliation to Republican tomorrow, would I get kicked off the board because it's not,
No.
it's too many?
No, and that's state statute, 9-167A. What they would.
I don't have any plans, to be clear.
What would happen in that scenario is that would impact the ballot. Because the next election, you'd have to account for it. And that would change the ballot, who could be elected. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Secretary of State says you can't kick them off, but you make up for it next election season. And that, some of you have talked about circumventing the statute. The single biggest way that I've seen the statute circumvented is that example, where 9 people got elected, and one party, a couple of people left the political party they were elected as and joined the majority party. That's the most common scenario, actually, that happens.
Okay, did I see another hand? Yeah, no. Okay, do we need any more language? Do we have any more language questions? In terms of what we want to see? Again, we're looking, this will be the second read next board meeting.
I just want to be clear as to like the language is coming back, or we're going to write a third option, so to speak. Is that correct? From
Yes, so at this
Matthew?
stage, we have our most recent edition, which has no language about the same enrolled or the same political party. We have an option that is more specific, which is, well, so I guess there's degrees of specificity. We say nothing about the enrollment at the time of the vacancy. We say that they must be enrolled in the same political party, or that they are enrolled in the same political party, or we say enrolled in the same political party, plus we add some unaffiliated language.
Yeah.
Those are the three options. So we'd be contemplating next board meeting.
And we're adding language referencing the charter and 167A.
Yeah. And then Matt is checking with the Secretary of State.
Yeah,
On the,
on the petitioning thing, it's such a nuanced thing, maybe there is a scenario where you can't elect a bunch of petitioning people, I'll check that. Doesn't really affect your policy or the scenario we talked about, but I will just confirm that because there was a concern. The only other change I would recommend, we have to say this, the language about may talk to the town committees, I've never seen town committees and policies as a general rule, it's probably not the right thing to do. And it's not prescriptive, it just says you may. It's up to you all, and your town chairs will probably get offended that I said this, but if you want to call your town chair, call your town chair. But I don't know that a board of ed policy should say you may call your town chair to consult with them. I just think it's odd and a little out of place, probably in modern day policies.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we struggled with when we've had previous vacancies is that, we've tried to sort of use policy as a hybrid between a process and a policy. And so some of this is somewhat process. I think that's a process piece that's showing up in policy.
Okay.
What have you seen boards do because what you don't want to have happen is make up the process when you get there, right?
Mhm.
So what have you seen boards do to supplement their policy so that they're not figuring it out as they go?
I don't know that boards spend a lot of time on that. I think that they make up their own decision when the vacancy occurs. People sometimes do interviews with candidates who are interested. To your point, sometimes they'll talk to their party leaders and they'll pick someone and they'll just pick that person. But it is what it is. It's just, it says they may talk to them, and it's just an odd, to me, it just sort of sticks out a little bit as odd. You may talk to anybody you want about the vacancy, but boards don't really, I think, spend a lot of time on how they do it, which maybe they should, but they don't.
Well, that's a little bit what we found was, we, by policy, we have a meeting in which we receive a resignation, and then our next regular meeting or a special meeting for that purpose is when we appoint the next person. So it's not a tremendous amount of time to figure it out. So I think the hope is, again, kind of to the idea of leaving some infrastructure for you behind yourself as you move through time, but okay. Okay, any other questions or comments? So we have, I'm going to repeat it again. We're hearing back from the Secretary of the State on the petitioning candidates from a majority party. We're hearing back on some language about the charter and the state statute to clarify this process. And then we're also looking at 3 different options for paragraph 4. Okay. All right. Thank you all for your time this morning. We'll move to public comment.
Thanks, everybody.
And Matt, thank you very, very much.
It's my pleasure.
Grateful
Yeah.
for your time.
Anytime, thanks.
Good morning. If anybody in person or online would like to participate in public comment, please approach the podium or use the raised hand icon and wait to be recognized. Please state your name and address for the record and note you will have up to 3 minutes to comment. We have no raised hands or people in the audience to participate.
Okay, may I have a motion to adjourn? That's Julie, seconded by Robin. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you all.